Hello, good evening, and welcome to Roger Rosenblatt and Friends, Conversations at the Turn of the Century. My name is Susan Engel, and I direct the Adult Division in the Charles Simon Center for Adult Life and Learning here at the 92nd Street Y. And I'm so glad to see so many of you with us for this very exciting event. And if I might add a personal note, it is a dream come true for me to present these people tonight on our stage, and a highlight of my 18 years working at the 92nd Street Y. Tonight is the second of this astounding 8-part series where we explore a different subject area and reflect on this past century. As you know, tonight is America's favorite subject, the movies. But whether we're exploring humor, the arts, literature, the city, social progress, history, it is the informal and intimate nature of these discussions that make them so unique. It's now my pleasure to introduce the man who makes it happen and sets this engaging tone. He is an essayist on the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer on PBS, and he's also Parsons University Professor of Writing at Southampton College of Long Island University. He is also editor-at-large for Time, Inc., and has received nearly every journalistic award there is. Keenly intelligent, utterly delightful, and witty, it's no wonder that he's such a treasured friend to so many of the illustrious people who have agreed to take part in this series. He has also become one of the best friends the 92nd Street Y has ever had. Ladies and gentlemen, America's favorite essayist, Mr. Roger Rosenblatt.
Thank you. We're all very glad you're here. This business about Roger Rosenblatt and friends is wishful thinking. I really don't have any friends. We talk about the movies. Just say the word, the movies. Let's go to the movies. What's at the movies? Characterizes the whole country. Thrills us as no other form of art or entertainment. When you're a kid, you go to the movies, you see these dark palaces and the dusty chandeliers and mysterious balconies and invisible kings and queens, and you make out in the movies. How is that done again, making out? All of that in our inner and our outer lives. When I was a teenager, I had 3 major academic interests: girls, sports, and movies, not always in that order. And I had a habit, irritating, of quoting lines from movies in normal conversation. You may imagine how delightful this was. Somebody was trying to carry on something normal, and then I would throw in a line from a movie, and it wasn't any ordinary lines, like "here's looking at you, kid," or any of that. It were the lines that particularly interested me. 2, I could never, or originally could never, get into a conversation. One was from the movie Earthquake. And George Kennedy was always playing a cop. He was playing a cop in this. Rescued a woman who was being stalked throughout the movie by a man who wanted to attack her during the earthquake. You would have thought something else would have been on his mind, but he was clearly a specialist. And when the earthquake was at its worst, he jumps the girl. Kennedy grabs the guy, throws him off, shoots him or something, and says to her, "I don't know what it is about earthquakes. They bring out the worst in some guys." I promise you, for 25 years, I've been trying to get that into a conversation. But I did get a line in from a movie which would have seemed on the surface much more difficult. This was a Sherlock Holmes movie, one of the Nigel Bruce, Basil Rathbone movies, where Dr. Watson is trying to build Holmes's reputation with some strangers who don't know his work, and mentions a case and says to these people, Dr. Watson does, "Haven't you ever heard of the giant rat of Sumatra?" Haven't you ever heard of the giant rat of Sumatra? Haven't you ever heard of the giant rat of Sumatra? For years, I tried to get that into a conversation. Then I was working at the Washington Post. This was in the mid-'70s, and some buddies and I went out for lunch, and it happened to be the day of the 50th anniversary of Mickey Mouse. Haven't you ever heard of the giant rat of Sumatra? And someone at lunch said, has there ever been a bigger rodent? Okay, we're in for a treat tonight. We have three people who, though they are too modest to say so, are responsible for some of the best of 20th century culture. So let's go to the movies with Joanne Woodward, Paul Newman, and Sidney Lumet. I gather you know these people. But though this is hardly required, let me remind you of the extent and the depth and the value of them. Starting with Joanne, who's just an extraordinary actress and has been always and is now a wonderful director. And you know the films. I don't know why this comes first to mind, but From the Terrace. Maybe it's because I was watching From the Terrace on AMC. I'm glad you guys have patched it up because it's kind of a wild fight. The Long Hot Summer, The Sound and the Fury, Three Faces of Eve, for which you won the Academy Award. And a particular favorite of mine, and maybe you remember this, the They Might Be Giants, with George C. Scott, where, as you can see why it's a favorite of mine, Joanne played a psychiatrist named Dr. Watson. The only thing that this great woman has not done is to create her own brand of salad dressing and lemonade, and for that, we will turn to her husband, but first, the pleasure of introducing Joanne Woodward. And now the maker of the salad dressing and the lemonade.
Also
Paul
the,
once
the
told
giant rat of Sumatra.
Paul once told me that somebody had approached him with the idea of making a cookie called the Fig Newman, which I would have thought would have just been great. Sorry you didn't do that.
Oh, we've done it.
Did you do it?
Oh, yeah.
Our daughter did.
Wonderful. On a note that reveals character as well as a more serious note, the money from all these products goes to all good causes, including their own camps for children with very serious diseases, terminal diseases. And it's just a joy to see people of such gifts really mean and demonstrate what it means to give something back, because this is very rare, as we know. Paul's movies are part of our lives. HUD, The Hustler, Cool Hand Luke, The Sting, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, The Verdict, which Sidney directed Paul in. Wonderful performance. The Color of Money, for which he won the Academy Award, and on and on. Somebody up there likes me. I think that was Ginny's and my first date, actually. We were 4, I think.
Thanks.
You don't seem as amused by that as I thought you might be. A great fellow in every possible way, Paul Newman. I was looking over, almost just to make sure that my eyes weren't deceiving me, the list of films that Sidney Lumet has directed. And I won't remember all of them, but what I will tell you will take your breath away, as it did mine when I went through them again. Serpico, The Prince of the City, Dog Day Afternoon, 12 Angry Men, Network, Murder on the Orient Express, View from the Bridge, Long Day's Journey into Night. That's worth a life, isn't it? And wholly deservedly, he was given the D.W. Griffith Award from the Directors Guild of America. A pleasure to introduce Sidney Lumet. So we're going to start personal and then get general, and I'm going to ask all three of our friends here the same question, autobiographically, starting with Joanne, and just we work our way around. How did you get into films and theater, and why? What was the attraction?
I got in, well, I don't know. I have no idea. Somehow, the first memory I ever have is being on stage, which I think was probably placed there by my mother, whose dream in life was to be an actress. And as soon as she saw I had enough hair to curl in ringlets like Shirley Temple, she did. I had the earliest permanent you've ever seen. You know, the kind with the wires going up like that? Yeah. And that's where I spent my childhood, my high school years, my college years. And then I came to New York, went to the neighborhood playhouse, learned about the group theater, which changed my life, as it did Sidney's, and went to work in television, live television. One of the first shows I ever did was with Sidney. Many after that, because he was directing Danger. And then after that, You Are There, where I played Cassandra in The Fall of Troy. You remember that, Sidney?
I remember it
Yeah,
very well.
very well.
You also played an extraordinary lady in the Oklahoma
Land Rush, yes. I just remember in Cassandra saying to, I forget who played Priam, I had on this long black wig and I had a southern accent which hadn't quite gone yet. And I was saying, oh, Father, Father, burn the horse. That's one of my treasured moments.
Matched only by Paul
Yes.
playing Plato in The Death of
yes.
Socrates,
Oh, right, yes.
saying, but we cannot let Socrates die.
Is that the way he said it?
Much.
And then, I don't know, I went on and somehow got into the movies and was signed to under contract, and I don't know, this is not anything lengthy for a discussion, except that everybody always talks so vehemently about the contract system in Hollywood and all of that. And I loved it. I loved it. I had been very poor, and I was being paid $350 a week, I think, at that time. And you were paid for 40 weeks a year, and then you had 12 weeks you were on layoff. And so I said to my agent, why couldn't I get him to pay me the whole 52 weeks? I'll take less. They can prorate it. And they did. And I think that was the first time that was ever done. And I personally thought it was wonderful. I could get my fingernails done there at 20th Century Fox. They would wash my car. They would do my hair. And I had my own dressing room. It was heaven. Life has never been any better than it was.
Paul, how'd you start, and what was the appeal? What was the attraction?
Well, the first thing that triggered it is I got thrown in jail. A bunch of the guys in the football team, it's irrelevant, but for certain reasons at any rate, I could no longer play football, so I went out and tried out for a play, and subsequently, I think In my junior and senior year, I think I did 8 plays, stage managed 4 plays. I wrote and directed a musical, and also ran a laundry business. The only student-run enterprise on Main Street. I graduated, I think, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I was on my way to summer stock. I did winter stock, did 17 plays in 25 weeks. Came back to Cleveland, Ohio, because my father died, and worked at the family business for a while, and then went to Yale for a year. And came to New York and got lucky and got into a play that ran for 16 months, won the Pulitzer Prize.
That was Picnic? Is that
Yeah.
right?
And gave me a kind of a financial basis that I could continue in theater. Did probably the worst film that was made during the 50s, called The Silver Chalice, where I wore a cocktail skirt, a Greek cocktail skirt, and I complained bitterly because Nero had this long evening gown, which I thought, with my legs, I thought I would be better off with, but did not work with that. At any rate, I survived that, came back to the theater, and then started. I met this wench over here, and started a salad dressing company, which outgrosses my films, which is humiliating. Not only outgrosses my films, but outgrosses my best films. And that's about it.
That'll do. How did you meet Joanne?
How did we meet?
Joanne,
You-
just not to be discussed.
Joanne, how did you meet Paul?
Actually, we met in our mutual agent's office in 1952, something like that. It was very hot August day. And in those days, you know, you didn't have air conditioning in a lot of places, and I sure didn't in my Coldwater flat. So I would come into my agent's office, MCA it was in those days, so that was air conditioned, so I would go in periodically so I could sit and sort of relax. And one day I was sitting outside talking to his secretary, my agent's secretary, and he came out of the office with this disgustingly beautiful young man in a seersucker suit. Not only was it a seersucker suit, it was a seersucker suit which didn't have a crease in it. It wasn't wrinkled or anything. I was hot and sweaty, and my hair was coming all down around there. And we were introduced, and I disliked him intensely on the spot. But anyway, we got to know each other better as time went on.
Incidentally, I only had one suit.
That was it.
And I pressed that suit myself in the morning.
Sidney, how about you? Where did it start and why?
I really didn't have any choice, Roger. It was during the Depression, and my father, who was an actor in the Yiddish theater, and in order to just get us through, just to feed us, found a man, don't ask me how, Dr. Julius Lunenfeld, who was a dentist with an office on Orchard and Delancey. And he talked him into doing a Jewish soap opera. What's so funny about it? Called the Bronzeville Zeta. Grandfather from Brownsville, Brooklyn, not Texas. And it was 5 15-minute shows a week. And he got $35 a week, which in the Depression was not bad. But he wrote it, directed it, acted 2 parts. My mother acted another part. And when I was 4 and a half or 5, he wrote in a kid. And guess who played it? Because I didn't need any salary. And then from there on in the Yiddish theater till I was 11, and then on to Broadway, and then after the Army, and then after the war, drifted into directing.
What do you mean drifted into directing?
I think, one of the weird things is it's happened every time I've talked to people who've done a good bit of work. And the one word we all have in common that we use all the time is luck. It was sheer luck. Luck to be of a certain age when television came in. And they were hiring anybody. They were dragging us off the streets. And it was also a very adventuresome time because nobody knew enough to say no. So you could try anything you wanted. And then 12 Angry Men, the first picture, sheer luck. Reggie Rose, who's a wonderful writer, had written a lot for Danger. And now was going to have his first movie done and asked me to do it. And Henry Fonda was the co-producer. And I had a little altercation with the studio when it was first formed in '49, and I got thrown out. And in order to show that I was not to be defeated, went down to the village, formed my own workshop for actors. And at the end of each year, there was a real program there, but at the end of each year, we would try to find a new play to do. And Fonda was in Mr. Roberts at the time. And 2 of the people in my workshop were in Mr. Roberts. Hank came down, saw the play that we did at the end of that year, and when Reggie proposed me, he said, "Great, I saw something he did off-Broadway, I thought it was terrific." Luck, sheer bloody luck.
Amazing. You talk about 12 Angry Men, and then I went through just thinking about the films all 3 of you have made. Many, if not most, deal with something that was basic to our lives years ago, which seems to have disappeared from movies. That is the subject of justice. A good person versus a bad person, and some right is done or attempted to be done, as in 12 Angry Men, or more lately in The Verdict, where right would prevail. Prince of the City, certainly about justice. Serpico is certainly about justice. Why has that theme generally, not entirely, but generally, gone out of movies?
Gone where?
Out of movies. That's not there.
Gee, Roger, I don't know. We're being pundits, right?
Yes.
Okay. It's disappeared like a lot of social issues have disappeared. People are happy with what they've got, seem to be. And the basic, certainly the basic thing that I was brought up with, and I don't know about Paul and Joanne, but as a New York Jew, what you were brought up with was the responsibility of the government was to take care of its weakest. And that's completely disappeared. So since that's disappeared on a national level, I guess it seems to me the reason it's disappeared from our work.
You mean that the idea of it has disappeared, or the appeal of the idea has disappeared in terms of
both? I think people don't think of it, and if they're reminded of it, run from it.
Any thoughts?
I think it's also, if we can say that our life is a reflection of what goes on in Washington, or in Congress, or in government generally. I'm not sure that justice, as we conceived of it, or as I conceived of it as a child, is a part of what I see in going on in government these days. That is the last thing, it seems to me, that anybody thinks of, is justice as a concept.
So it is not then appealing to the writers and the directors or the audience as a subject?
I think it's lost its veracity. I mean, it's no longer a part of it, a part of life. What is justice? What is it? Justice about what and to whom? And I don't know that anybody really, except occasionally, you see this on television more often. There's more likely to be something involving itself in terms of justice as a concept, I think, on television, which is one of the reasons why, at its best, I think television these days can almost do more. It doesn't always do it, but it can. And when it does, it has such a vast audience that maybe you can really tell a story. Maybe that's a way of getting a sense of justice.
Interesting. Paul? I'm over here, Paul.
I think, you know, the human animal is a thing of appetite. And I think why am I the only guy that has trouble with this? I think the society asks for certain things during certain times, and I think it exhausts certain things. During the 30s, there was the insistence on social change and minimum wages and social rights, and then there was the theater of the psychological drama. Daddy never kissed me, which is why I'm thrashing the hell out of mommy, and now it seems to be about the senses. And every year, it ratchets itself up. You deal with the senses, and each year you have to increase the sensational aspects of it in order to satisfy the animal. And you know, we're that way sexually, we're that way in terms of violence, we're that way in terms of quick visual cuttings and very, very active kind of films. So that's a very simple answer to a not very profound question.
I think also, Roger, it's really fairly simple in the sense that I'm not terribly aware of people questioning justice. So they're not going to be interested in pictures that do.
Does it mean that all the problems have been solved, or they're not interested in?
Oh,
unearthing?
no, the problems haven't been touched upon, in my view. I mean,
See, what I meant by this awkward, inept question was that the pleasure.
I was just looking for an ending, that's all.
The pleasure of watching a movie in which a little guy, with all the odds against him, somehow prevails, is a basic pleasure of going to the movies, you know, and providing that he prevails in a cause worth dignity that has a value in itself, and don't see that very much in movies anymore, as we did, for example, in The Verdict, or Absence of Malice, or somebody who wants to set some wrong right. There's less of it.
Well, also, this is the second generation that's been brought up on television.
yeah, I think it's
And I think
very
that really, it affects the attention span. It's had a tremendous effect, I think, on, the commercial interests always design things for the lowest common denominator because it gets the widest audience. And I think that's had a terrible effect. It's had a terrible effect on literature as well. So.
And I think Paul's so right in bringing that up and there's another reason I think that TV affects it in terms of certainly what our generation thought was an important issue. The isolation of television, the fact that you look at it alone, enjoy it alone, your classical example is that if you look at a Marx Brothers movie, you're never going to laugh at it the way you will sitting among 400 people. You won't do that alone. And I think that not only in comedy, I think that's true in all emotion. And you won't feel as deeply, you won't perceive as deeply. I think it's within the nature of the medium in television. And when we're talking about the periods of where, quote unquote, for a nice pretentious statement, when justice mattered, we're talking about times of tremendous activism among great groups of people. We're talking about either the 60s or the 30s or the 40s with the war going on and the aftermath of the war. And I think Paul is dead on by naming television as one of the reasons that it seems to me things have shrunk a bit.
In choosing films that you would do now, or films to direct, would you make the choices on different bases? Could you make Serpico in the 90s?
I would doubt it. As a matter of fact, Al just did the picture about Wygan, the whistleblower on the tobacco companies. It's got glowing reviews. It's got sensational reviews. I hear the picture's very good. I haven't seen it yet. It did no business last weekend.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is something about what's happened, and maybe what Sidney is saying about television, because it is isolated. And I personally, I think there are times when maybe the moment has passed, but there was a time when television did attempt to do things that were important. I know when I first started, California, you sort of begin to fade away past a certain age, a certain age, and there's not really something for you to do, so you go and you do television. And I loved it, because I always thought making movies took too long anyway, and television was nice, it went faster. But it also was, it attempted something. It attempted during the 70s and the 80s, especially during the 80s, when you could do things that you thought had some merit, some meat. And I don't know why that's gone away, except that people have isolated. I'm not sure that it's television. I tend to blame it on computers. I mean, everybody sits in front of, don't you hate? I don't own a computer. I wouldn't own a computer. I know that makes me terribly old-fashioned.
I'm just saying that the preparation for the computer, Joanne, came from the box. It's still a screen.
Right.
Yeah.
12
inches, 11 inches, 17, whatever.
But it is an isolating factor. My sense of, I think, when I first saw a film which I thought was quintessentially that of justice, humanity, all the aspects that you want to see in a film, was when I was in drama school in New York, and some glorious person brought back Charlie Chaplin's films. And I had never seen a Charlie Chaplin film. I wasn't old enough to have seen it when it was done originally. But the scene, for instance, when he's holding the rose and the little blind girl, whom he has
City
Lights gone to, given his money so she can be operated on, and he went to prison and everything, and he comes back, and he's standing there, and she's in her flower shop, and she sees him outside, and he's looking in the window, and she comes out, she brings him a rose, and he puts the rose up to his lips, and he looks at her, and she recognizes him. Well, that to me, I said, this is what life is about. This is what acting is about. I know what the world is about now. That told me something. I mean, really, it truly, truly did. I don't know of a picture that can do that now about justice or anything else, and I'm not sure why.
Or anything as small as love.
Yeah, I guess it was just.
I think also. I think you get into the whole concept of leadership. And movies now are not made by people who make movies. They're made by focus groups. will we make this movie? We send the script out to 40 different people. They write the thing. They get paid money to write the thing. And the guy who's at the studio, who can't read anyway, looks at what the focus group says. And if the focus group gives an okay on something, well, then I guess the movie gets done. But where does that leave a place for the people who are the real visionaries? It gives them no place to go at all. They have no home.
Is it all a matter of money? I mean, is the question of
Tremendous amount of it is money, because the cost of doing films, the cost of making mistakes is catastrophic today.
But Paul, what's also very interesting about that is it's not only the fact that movies are getting so expensive, and they, Titanic could have sunk the studio if it hadn't made the money it did. But
Too bad.
I came across a figure about a year ago that was staggering to me. After the sale of armaments, entertainment, which is movies, books, records, is the second greatest factor in the balance of payments. Quote,
In exports.
in exports. Now, we're not talking about that little Nickelodeon, which got its name because you paid a nickel and walked in. This has grown into something of just such unbelievable proportion and importance in terms of sheer dough. And it's not only the money. I don't know. I hope I'm not being an old, careless, irascible old curmudgeon or what have you, but it seems to me a basic thing has been lost. I'm going to say something which I hope you don't start throwing things at me. I was deeply upset, deeply offended by, what is the name of that Benignini movie that won the Academy Award?
what was it?
Oh, yes.
Life
Is Beautiful.
Now, I know it was a big hit in Israel, but that doesn't mean that, all that means to me is that Israelis can be as corrupt as anybody else. The whole idea of a fake, sentimental piece about anything in the Holocaust is so profoundly upsetting. Don't tell Harvey Weinstein any of this, because he's one of the few guys around who's still hiring. But I thought it was a reprehensible movie on every level, and will open the floodgates for the picture 5 years from now in which Sylvester Stallone will parachute into Auschwitz and rescue the scientist who has got the secret of, I thought it was a totally corrupt piece of work. I don't think the man intended it that way. I think his intentions were, I don't know if they were honorable, but I felt a lack of a certain sensibility in what he was dealing with. And the audience response to it in Israel, in the all over the world, it was a gigantic hit. It was a terrible indication to me of a loss of what our history means to us.
Is this because of what Paul said, that if not the actuality, at least the idea of a focus group preferred a sentimental cast put on the Holocaust?
I think that's very possible. I don't know this. This is sheer guessing on my part. But the first thing you heard on that soundtrack was a voiceover in which, and I still remember the line. The line was, "This is a fable." Now, I will bet you, with everything I know about movies, that Harvey Weinstein or somebody at Miramax said, look, we can't just let this picture out loose in America, because there are going to be Jews in New York who are going to get very upset about it. We better label it as a fable. I think it was a totally cynical piece of work in that way. I think it was designed to offset opinions like mine by letting me know in advance, oh, it was a big hit in Israel. The German Jews loved it, and so on. Well, I shouldn't go on. It's not what we're here to talk about. But
Well, we are. It becomes a wider question. What do you all see as the major difference between movies when you were making most of them and movies now? And have things gotten better or worse, or a little of each?
Well, my movie career was episodic, and I never really felt a part of Hollywood or being a movie star. I don't know why. I mean, had nothing to do with me for some reason. I mean, the best part of it, as I said, was my early years at the studio, when I just loved the idea that I would always be working, and I didn't care what. I mean, they gave me the script of Three Faces of Eve, and I said, oh, okay. And we did it. But it seems to me that there was something that happened, and I hate to go back to the studio, the whole studio aspect of it, but for good or ill, those studios, because they made a lot of movies, they didn't pay the actors a lot. Certainly there were not the fortunes being made as they are being made now, which I've always thought, gee, I mean, I don't care what you do on screen, it can't be worth that much. I mean, that's when the president or of the United States or something doesn't, I mean, my goodness, it seems strange, doesn't it?
You're eating your own young, Joanne.
Huh? I'm sorry. Yeah. But anyway, but the fact is the studios were there because they made movies, and that's why they were there, especially, in the early days and even up through the 50s and early 60s, which is when my major career was there. It was the same way when we did television. When we first did television, there was a kind of excitement, and even though some of the programs might have been silly, they meant a great deal, and they meant a great deal to the audience, and movies meant a lot to the audience when people went to see them. At least it did in my day. And I think an awful lot of movies which were beautifully done, had a lot to say. They might have been naive, but I'm not sure that naive is a bad thing. I think it's a nice quality, and I'm sorry that we've lost it, because I think we've lost a lot of other aspects that go along with that quality. And I don't know what happened. I think the demise of the studios had a lot to do with it. Then suddenly the money became more important than the movie. And I mean, with Titanic, there's a perfect example to me. I mean, Paul finally turned to me after about 45 minutes to an hour and said, "When is it going to sink?" and we left. Anyway, what can I say? I'm sentimental. Anyway.
Hardly.
I think people are exhausted. I think they are bombarded on all sides by complex and issues that are difficult to understand, and whether it was mutual assured destruction. And I think they get anesthetized after a while. Again, and I go back to this idea, the only thing that they respond to are those things that can bombard the senses and keep ratcheting it up. And they ratchet up the violence, and they ratchet up everything else. And also, I think it's cyclical. I think, you could probably say art has been cyclical, the Greeks and the Romans and the Dark Ages and the Renaissance, and maybe in a very tiny way that's happening with film and theater. And I think we've exhausted the social consciousness cycle. I think we exhausted the psychological drama, and there's right now there's nothing to replace it. There probably will be something to replace it very quickly. It will probably be environmental. I think it will have to do with global warming and those issues that are going to be very, very visceral.
But treated seriously, not as spectacular disaster.
Yeah, well, they'll have to treat it seriously, otherwise they won't deal with it.
The social ideas that are attached to movies now don't necessarily come within the movies, but by those who, well, for example, the obvious attack that a violent movie produces violent society, therefore movies ought to be, and television too, and any other form that, of entertainment ought to be subject to regulation and governing because of a putative direct connection between a violence in the work of art and violence in the streets. Does that make sense to any of the three of you?
Monkey see, monkey do.
I don't agree with Paul. I don't agree about the whole idea. I don't believe it, Roger. I don't think that's where it's coming from. One of the greatest sources of money for movies is the overseas market. It's now 60% of the gross of a movie. And we don't see that happening overseas. American movies, and television shows which dominate France, dominate Germany, dominate Italy, they haven't had the reaction that we've had in terms of violence. I think it becomes an easy point of identification. I don't necessarily think it's the true one. I don't think I know what the true one is. In fact, I know I don't. But I think it's more complex than what people are seeing. It's about caring, and it seems to me that the caring has been eliminated. I don't know why. Maybe we've got now, 2 generations, 3 generations, without an unavoidable crisis, like the Depression was an unavoidable crisis. It affected everybody. World War II was an unavoidable crisis, affected everybody. And really, since at the end of the civil rights movement in the early 70s, we've had no unavoidable confrontations. And somehow or other, that seems to me, that passivity that this 20 years of Eisenhower life of the 50s has somehow or other, to me, something to do with the eruptions of insanity that happen. Because the insanity is always there. And it's only a question of, will it be directed to something that helps us, says something to us, has meaning for us, or will it be completely wanton, destructive, and just killing people?
Does it have anything to do with what you might call the deification of the individual at the expense of everything else, including the community?
Yeah, Paul. Yeah, I think it does.
Can you open that up a bit?
No.
Why did I know that was deification of the individual, meaning that the individual has within him all that's right and wrong, so that there's no larger context?
No, he's disconnected from the community, and by that very act and the separation of himself from that, he is deified, and his interests, his appetites, his satisfaction, his gratification is the compelling force that motivates him.
I think it's very interesting what Paul is saying, because apropos of a struggle or justice, which is what began this discussion, the one place where you do see it is in the gay theater, which is a really active, revolutionary drive in the arts, and has accounted really for among the best playwrights and the best theatrical productions we've seen in the 90s. And that doesn't have nearly the deification that Paul is talking about. It has much more the feeling of we're queer and we're here, and it's we.
Yeah, but that's what I say. That's the community.
Right.
Right.
Was there a film for each of you, or a couple of films, that, apart from the satisfaction or dissatisfaction with any element of performance or directing, that you sat back and said, this is good work, this was worth a life? Joanne?
Yes, well, over the years, you mean? Yes, there are a couple of films that, for I don't know what reasons, were films that meant a great deal to me, and I felt had something to say that needed being said, or at least as far as I was concerned. Excuse me. One was Rachel. Thank you. Yes, it's our home movie. Yes.
Who directed you in Rachel? Oh.
Yeah, and our children were in it, so we didn't have to pay them and everything. It was very inexpensive. How much did that film cost?
$700,000.
$700,000. Unbelievable. But there was something about, I found that character. I remember thinking at the time, I had been acting on screen for about 10, 15 years at that time. And I had studied at the neighborhood playhouse with Sanford Meisner. And Sandy used to say to us, you know, it takes 20 years to be an actor. And I remember asking him in class, what does that mean? And he said, well, just look at it this way. You know, when you play a violin, when you first learn to play the violin, you always have to think about where you're going to put your fingers, right? So when you'll know you're an actor when you don't have to think where you're putting your fingers. And for years, that haunted me because I was constantly having to do preparations and all sorts of things to do scenes. And I got to Rachel, and for some reason, whatever, maybe because I had this terrific director, or whatever, and a great script. But it's the first time I felt like I walked on the set and I was there, and it was there, and it happened, and there was not thought processes going on in my head. And also because I thought that woman had something to say about women, about life, about how life treated women and treats women, even now. And so it was a successful film, so we figured that was an important film. And another one which made me feel very much the same way was Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, which I also felt, which is, I think, one of my favorite films. And again, maybe because I'm a woman, and I'm a woman of an age who went through all the angst of being a woman. And I look at my daughters and I say, ugh, you think you've got problems. Anyway, so those, and a third film which I was barely in, but which I felt very privileged to be in, was Philadelphia, because that truly had something to say to.
Paul?
I think in an early resume I described myself as an emotional Republican. Which meant basically that you could take the kid out of Shaker Heights, but you couldn't take Shaker Heights out of the kid. And it's what Joanne was talking about when you walk out on the stage and you know that you're going to have to ask for something, and you're not going to have to work to get it. It's simply going to be there. And that's what really happened on the verdict. It was organic somehow. And there was a certain intelligence that you had to ascribe to the character, and a certain intelligence in the way that you had to approach the part. But the emotional aspects of it were something you simply didn't have to work for. That was a big step for me.
You remember the verdict. The down-and-out lawyer having to fight, we go back to this, the good fight, the right battle. Everything goes wrong until the end. Was this this wasn't the gorgeous hero of the Young Philadelphians or from the Terrace or anything. This was a guy who'd been through the mill, largely of his own making. Was this something new? Was this something more difficult, more testing?
Well, if you haven't been there, you can invent it. And there was something that was very personal in that to me, and other stuff that you simply had to, imagine.
Sidney?
I think it's probably different for a director than it is for an actor in terms of the kind of satisfaction, because we can get our satisfaction from so many different sources without any flattery of any source. The verdict will always be memorable to me for one reason: Paul's performance. It was a level of human revelation that you're lucky if you have it 3 times in a career. If you just see it 3 times in just going. I love going to the theater or movies. I love the pictures that were ambivalent. One of the reasons I love Prince of the City is because I didn't know how I felt about the leading man. The way I was brought up, a rat was the worst thing that you could be. And here I was doing a piece about a guy who turned in everybody. And it wasn't until I finished the picture and looked at it in the first cut, and I thought, wow, he's heroic. But it was a complete discovery for me at that point. Instinctively, I must have known that earlier, because I remember there were a number of stars who wanted to play the part, and I didn't want a star for it because I felt that part of the reason that a star happens is because there is something in them, in the persona, that makes an audience connect with them, that makes an audience feel for them. And I didn't want in that any easy identification. If he was going to win you, it had to be through the way he behaved. And he was going to behave abominably. So I like Prince of the City for that reason. A picture that I liked very much, it was a complete failure, critically, financially, was Daniel from Dr.
I'm sorry?
Daniel.
Huh? Daniel from Dr. O's Book of Daniel, which, again, had an extraordinary ambivalence about it. People kept saying, oh my God, we were interviewed all the time, Edgar and I, and they'd say, oh, it's about the Rosenbergs. Do you think they're guilty? Do you think they're innocent? And I kept saying, and I wasn't being disingenuous, this is not about the Rosenbergs. This is about the children. This is about what, the name of the picture is Daniel. That's the son. And this is a picture about what happens to the children of parents who are wildly committed emotionally to whatever they're doing. It could be politics, it could be art, it doesn't matter. But the parents are off pursuing this. What's happening with the kids? And the exploration of that and the ambivalence of that appealed to me a lot.
I have questions from you. They vary in scope. To Paul and Joanne, your lengthy marriage. I wouldn't have characterized it quite that way.
Seems like forever.
Your long and successful marriage has defied Hollywood's persona. Please describe 3 main reasons your marriage has been successful and has lasted so many years.
Lust.
And the 2 others.
When you have that, you don't need the
You don't need
door.
anything else.
Well, actually, no. Well, I think there are 2 others at least, certainly. One is I wrote this about Paul Roddy McDowell, God rest his soul. Used to do books, and he would do photographic books, and then he would ask us all to write about, people in the photographs. And one year, when he did his book, he asked me to write about a picture of Paul. And so I thought, oh my God, what am I going to say that's printable? And then what I wrote was, in some way, I can't remember exactly, but I said, beauty fades and sensuality goes and whatever. But if somebody can make you laugh, that's a treat. So he makes me laugh. I mean, after how many years? I think we've been married for 42 years, but
She's laughing at me.
yeah. Oh, he's really.
Nothing that I say, no
No.
massive wit, nothing. It's just,
He's really, really funny.
drop my pants in the middle of the auditorium. She thinks that's really funny.
He's really funny. He's really fun. And also between the 2 of us, we have managed to give birth to 3 of the most wonderful women. They are the most extraordinary women. And just for that alone, that's a treat too. Okay.
Here's one that'll keep us here till midnight. This is from Paul. As a political activist, what are your thoughts on Messrs. Bush, McCain, Gore, and Bradley? There ought to be, I know, some sort of internal governor in me that says, don't ask this question. Nice look.
That's the answer right there.
The only way I can answer that question is to say, I think the biggest disaster we can have would be to have a Democratic president and a Democratic Congress, or a Republican president and a Republican Congress. So it's almost, well, no, why would I say that? I have not made up my mind in terms of the Democratic candidate. I have some reverence for McCain because he says what he thinks. That's few and far between. I have some serious disagreements about women's rights and abortion and some other things, but he's the only person who's really speaking loudly about campaign finance reform, which is one of the main issues. But the main issue.
Not quite.
What do you think, Joanne?
What is the main
You
issue?
watch the breakup of a marriage here, right here, on stage for the first time after 44 years.
It's nice to break news.
Yeah, right.
We can get
Yeah,
back to lust
yeah.
if we're really in trouble.
No, you said that was the main issue. I know that may appear to be the main issue, but I am at the point in my life when I say, I don't know how to do it, but if the environment does not become the main issue right now, there's not going to be any other issue because we are not going to be here to examine it. So this has got to happen, and I must admit to
second that.
finding very much to be disappointed intensely in every single one of the candidates, including Mr. Gore, who has been vehement about the environment up until this point, and now it seems to have gone away. And I don't know why people seem to think that they're going to have a magical quality which will save them when New York becomes inundated. It's not a joke. And we were talking about, I said, my dream now is to do a movie. I'm just in the planning stages, so you may see this in your theater, or maybe on television. But I want to do a movie about a crazy old lady who becomes so overwhelmed by her desire to do something about this that she manages to get into Congress, into the Senate. How? I don't know. Haven't figured that one out yet. But anyway, she gets in there to be like Henry Fonda, to talk and talk and talk and talk until people understand the importance of this issue. And when they start to attack her and try to get her out, she tears her clothes off. I mean, I think it becomes biblical finally. This saggy-breasted, overweight, crazy woman. But I mean, isn't that an interesting?
Paul's very interested
yeah.
in it.
You can do. I'm not going to touch that one.
Anyway, that's what I feel about. Yes. Okay. And I am working on this film.
But we're
It's
back to
no
social
joke.
justice. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the
It
context.
is. It's social
Doing the right
Yeah.
thing.
I mean, when was the last time you saw the Henry Fonda? Well, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Yeah.
Now, what a movie! I mean,
It was even better when Jimmy Stewart played it.
Yeah, I mean, Jimmy Stewart. I'm sorry, not Henry Fonda. Jimmy Stewart. Yes, thank you. It's the same person. They are. They were. Henry Fonda also did the same thing. But the fact is, how seldom do we see that kind of film anymore, which really does give you that impulse to want to jump up and do something.
Good deal.
Actually, Jimmy Stewart did take his clothes off, but they cut the scene.
Better than Claude Rains taking his clothes off.
Right.
This is for Sidney. Do you feel that shooting on location in New York City is important for reasons other than realism? Does it positively affect your imagination, skills, etc., abilities of your cast? Something about the city.
But the city's very exciting. It's also incredibly rich in terms of portraying any mood you can possibly want in a movie, any style you might want in a movie. I don't know how many movies I've done here, Roger. I think it's well over 30. And I've never used the same location twice. It's just gives you that much. So that's a big part of it. Another reason, I think, is the fact that the city exists without me very nicely. One of the problems about living and working in Hollywood is that it's a company town. And everything's about movies. You read the trades before you read the paper. And it's not something that you can resist. Anybody who says, oh, well, I wouldn't fall into that. No, you'll fall into it, believe me. The pressure is movies, 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 movies. And here, well, I'm kind of stunned that the grosses of movies have started to appear in our daily papers now on Monday, because the city clearly can exist without it. Along with my grosses, there are the grosses of what Christie's sold yesterday, or what was it, 46 million for a Picasso or what have you. And there's a lot more than just our profession and our work, and I think it's very important for us to have that as a way of just keeping sane.
It's a kind of I was going to say an antagonistic question. At any rate, it gets your attention. Did Elia Kazan deserve his recent award? That's one part of it. The other part of this question, I'm not quite sure where it goes, but is Orson Welles' work overrated? I think I'll leave that one off. Let's just stay with Kazan. Any thoughts? Did you have any feelings about it when it was given?
Well, I think, if anybody, Sidney just said to me before we got here, I don't know how many of you go to off-Broadway theaters, and I, in my older years, have become, once again, tremendously involved and overwhelmed by the work of Clifford Odets, whose work I first learned, when I was in drama school. And so I got a full course as a young actress about the group theater and about everything about it. I've ended up 10 years ago doing a documentary on the group theater because I suddenly realized everybody from the group was dying, and if I didn't do something, they'd all be gone and we'd never really have that history. And I interviewed everybody who was still alive, one of whom was Kazan, and I remember trying to talk to him on that subject, and he wouldn't. He was writing a book at that time, and he said, "No, wait till you read my book," and so. But all I could think of was it's apples and pears. I have no sympathy for the political issue. I thought it was an appalling thing to do, although I wasn't there and I wasn't in those shoes. No, I was there actually at that time, but I was a kid. I remember being asked to sign the loyalty oath at CBS.
CBS.
Yeah. And, but to deny this man a reward, he's elderly, he's ill, for a work that is vast and extraordinary, it seems wrong and doesn't have anything to do with the other issue. So that was my feeling about it. Sidney,
Same.
do you know what?
Pretty much the same here. You know, it's always easy to envision yourself as a hero, but when you're in the trenches, you're really uncertain as to how you're going to respond to something. And I don't know what I would have done. I have to be honest, and maybe I would have been honorable about it, and maybe if I had 4 mouths to feed, my options would have been limited. I don't know.
Sidney?
It's so difficult because it's very complex. And I don't think it's apples and oranges. I think they're connected. About a year ago, we were going over to France, and I knew I was going to appear on some French program about the cinema, not about movies, about the cinema. And I knew I'd be asked this because it was right after the Academy Awards. And I thought about it, and I had always been of the opinion that, look, whatever he did, he did. It doesn't matter that he could have directed on Broadway. It doesn't matter that he wasn't being financially pressed. What if he wanted to direct movies? What if, just from a sheer creative point of view, that's the way he wanted to spend the rest of his life? And God knows, from a creative point of view, there have been few directors who've been better at it than Kazan. Then it somehow or other, it leapt on to another level. And this was after the Academy Awards. I was perfectly glad to see him. I was sorry. He seemed embarrassed. Marty seemed embarrassed. De Niro, it was a peculiar evening, I must say. But then I thought about it, and I realized that when I was talking to a French audience, that these people had been through an occupation. And one couldn't obviously equate the two. And I said as much. I said, look, this is not as if I am saying our McCarthy period was the same as you, whether you were in Vichy or whether you were in France under German occupation. Clearly yours was totally life and death. But the McCarthy period was as close to a fascist time in America as I've known in my lifetime. And I got raked over the coals, as did a number of friends. But that still didn't affect me about Gage until this thought came to me about the French. I said, what bothered me finally when I thought about it was that he validated something that was reprehensible. Not his behavior. I'm far past the point where I expect an artist to be a good person or an honorable person. Artists are people. They're going to be the worst and the best and anything in between. But what he did was he legitimized Martin Dies and Joe McCarthy and Roy Cohn. And he made all of those people respectable because he responded to them in their terms. And I said on this evening, I said, it is really as if in your terms, which were much more severe in France, it was like a collaborationist. And he became a collaborationist. So I understand what he did. I'm moved by what he did. I had never condemned him before, and I don't condemn him now. But I sure wish he hadn't said, you guys are legitimate.
We're at the end of our time. I wanted to come full circle. I hope this question isn't too abstract, but is there something that each of you could identify as the central pleasure of long lives of such important work? All three of you have contributed to, given so much of the best that is in the culture. Is there something personal that you derive from this work that you could express that said this is why I lived? Or should we go back to the lust question?
Oh, I don't know. I pass that on to somebody else while I think about it. Yeah. Doesn't have to be ladies first.
No.
Yeah.
No, it's simply, Sidney put his finger on it, and that is to acknowledge luck in the whole process. And I had a friend who said, luck is an art. People, luck passes by people, and they never recognize it. They don't put their hands on and grab a hold of it. And I guess someone can make a point for that, but it's been good luck and bad luck, but it's been the primary force in my life and career.
They say about writing that great accidents only happen to great writers. Sidney?
No, it's true what you say. The point is, there's a reason it happens to the great writers and doesn't happen to the other writers, right? I think you said it in the question. Long lives of work. That's its own reward. I never did. I mean, I've done individual pictures for the money. When I wanted to buy a house right across the street from here at 1380 Lexington Avenue, 35 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever it was, I did a picture to pay for the down payment. And I'm very glad I did. But it wasn't about fame, and I know you hear this all the time, but I can just tell you the truth from my heart. It wasn't about anything except what's the next picture I'm going to do. That's all I was interested in. As soon as I had a picture, I was bored. It was the next picture that excited.
And still?
And still. No, less now. It's just, we don't know what the result is going to be creatively, certainly critically or financially. And so the only thing that matters is the process. Have you worked honorably? Have you worked honestly? Have you done it well to the best of your ability? And that's its own reward. When you can say yes to that, you're very lucky.
Well, I've listened and I realized that mine is a journey. I think the journey is what has been the gift, the greatest gift to me, because I started out as a little girl wanting to play Scarlett O'Hara and feeling firmly convinced that this was all possible, and yet somehow doubting it, that it would ever happen. And to my amazement, it all happened. And the wonderful thing is that things happened at a time when they should happen. I won an Academy Award when I was young, and it was a daydream, and it was amazing. I went home, and I was sitting up in bed with my Academy Award and my Ovaltine. And I remember turning to Paul and saying, "Is this it?" But then I said, "Yeah, that's okay. That's that journey." And then it got to be another journey. It got to be a motherhood journey. It got to be saying acting isn't what it's about. Maybe it's directing. I went back to college. I graduated at 60. But I was allowed to do this. I had this life. Now I'm going to figure out how to go to Congress and take my clothes off. I bet they can't wait.
Just to conclude, I hope the three of you know how deeply grateful all of us are for you and all that you've done. Joanne Woodward, Paul Newman, Sidney Lumet.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.